Okay, please.
Lovely.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Just one thing, if you can hold the screen. Yeah, now we can see your whole face.
My long hair.
If you can hold the, yeah, please.
Great. Should we start? Lovely. As usual, let's start with a few moments of meditation. Just do some breathing meditation, some mindfulness of the breath, just to be able to get ready to let go of any disruptive thoughts. So we do 2 minutes of just breathing, letting go of any disruptive ideas, plans, etc. Okay, and so let's now generate the right kind of motivation to think as before. May the coming 1.5 hours, may this become a cause for me to gain a better understanding of the nature of reality. And may this cause me to generate more love and compassion for myself as well as for others, so that I'll eventually be able to actualize my full Buddha nature. And in that way, be of greatest benefit to myself and all other sentient beings. Take a moment to really feel that from the depth of your heart. Okay. And then, Iki, if you could display the prayers. As before, we'll do refuge and bodhicitta, and then the 4 immeasurables. Thanks. Okay. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulations of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay, great. Well, now for today, we'll continue with the Heart Sutra, but I had the great pleasure to listen to Geshe Damda's teachings. So I'm quite sure that everyone here has listened to him yesterday. He's actually one of my teachers. He taught my class when I studied at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics. He taught us Abhidhamma for 1 year, and he's been very kind and very supportive throughout my studies and later on. In fact, when I first was told about Gengetsula, who's been one of your teachers, I heard about him in Dharamsala when I wanted to learn Tibetan. Someone told me to go and see him. I went to the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics and I knocked on the first door I came by, and Geshe Damda opened the door. I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was. And I asked him where Gengetsula lives, and he actually took me to his room. But he doesn't remember that. But later on, every time I saw him, I didn't know him. Also later on, didn't realize right away who he was because he was in a higher class. I kept thinking, oh, he's the one who showed me Gengetsula's room. And so slowly, of course, I realized who he was, and he became one of my teachers. And it was beautiful the way, of course, he presents the Dharma. He's such an amazing teacher. And I thought, I want to listen. I couldn't listen to it last night. I couldn't be there live because I had to be with my dad, but I was able to listen to it today. And so it's perfect because we're pretty much at a time where we're also looking at the mind now, as in we've talked about the selflessness or the lack of inherent existence of form, that is the body, as part of the statement, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is no other than form, etc. And we haven't spoken about the emptiness of the mind yet, the nature of the mind. So it's much harder to actually explain that because we don't know the basis. We don't know the basis as well as we know the basis of emptiness here, which is the mind. We don't know that as well as we know the basis for the emptiness of the body. So the body itself, we're much more familiar with it. We're more familiar with the I, although, of course, we travel to India to find ourselves, but that's a whole different story. The thing is, we still know there's much more of a stronger sense, I, but we don't know the mind that well because we are so involved in the objects of the mind. We know the objects. And so Geshe talked about it today, that in the present, not today, yesterday, in the Prasangika school, they say the mind knows the mind. That is labeled, that is said based on the fact that the mind knows what appears to it. Remember, it was towards the end. It was after someone asked this question about reincarnation or about how to know the mind. I don't remember in which context, but definitely about saying that it was Daniel's question, I think, what knows the mind? Who knows the mind? And he said that the mind knows its own mind in general, just as when you pat your shoulder, you say in general, I pat myself. But then when you're very specific, that's the hand which pats the shoulder. And because we label I on both, I label the I on the hand and I label the I on my shoulder, I say I pat myself, right? So Geshe didn't say it in those words because of the labeling, etc., because it's the first lesson and he didn't talk about emptiness yet. But actually what he said was, I say I pat myself because I label I on my hand and I label it on my shoulder. So I say I pat myself. And then with regard to watching the mind, what is it that watches the mind? Well, it is the mental consciousness, which either watches a former moment of mind. So it's just, my mind right now is aware of the thought I had a moment earlier. So it watches the mind that took place a moment earlier. So it's kind of, it's like a memory. Okay. Or we say the mind watches itself when we become aware of the appearance to my own mind. So I'm aware that you appear to me. I know that you appear to me. This appearance is actually happening. My mind is like a mirror. He used the word mirror. My mind is like a mirror. So what is actually on the screen in front of me is not entering my body somehow. No, there's an appearance, just like an appearance in a mirror. If I put a mirror here, you'd be mirrored. Likewise, my mind acts through my sense consciousnesses, of course, through my senses, as a mirror, such that you appear to my mind, and I'm aware of that appearance to my mind. So I know my own mind because I know that appearance. So I label, Geshe didn't say that, but therefore I say I know my own mind because I know what appears to the mind. So my mind knows that. And because whatever my mind does, since that is the basis of imputation of the I label also I know that because the mind knows it. Just as when my hand pats my body, I say I pat myself. The I is labeled on the hand. Likewise, the I is labeled on the shoulder. Okay, and so the I pats the shoulder. And since right now I'm seeing myself, which is ridiculous, I'm actually looking at myself. I see myself here. So I'm saying I have the appearance of myself. I know the appearance of myself. So my mind knows itself in the sense it knows what appears to it. You guys appearing, etc. Does that make sense? So that's what he said. Beautiful. He said it really nicely. Okay, so in that way, we can know our own mind, and that is so hard to do. And how can we know the emptiness? How can we know, first of all, what the mind is? As Geshe Genlam Rinpa, great Genlam Rinpa of Dharamsala, he talked about it when Genlam Rinpa said, don't you know how it all mirrors it in the mind? I actually had the great fortune to once meet Genlam Rinpa twice or three times just before he passed away. I went to see him. Most of the IBD students would go on a Sunday and see him. Not most, but many of them went to see him, and I had the fortune to meet him on a few occasions, and then he unfortunately passed away. Anyway, he's an amazing practitioner, this tiny little hut. And so Geshe is saying, like, he reacted like, oh, it's just mirroring. It's just, don't you feel this mirror? Don't you? Well, yeah, because he had the experience. Of course, that's all he did. That's what practitioners do, watch their own mind, and come to know that, yes, there's a brain. Of course, there's a brain, and the brain does what a brain does, but that is not the same as the experience. There's neurons firing away, and there's electric current and whatever there is, and there are enzymes, and yes, all that takes place. But that is not the experience. The experience is when you see something, when you feel something, when you, I mean, even people who are brain dead, and when they come back from it, they talk about these vivid experiences. Their brain didn't do anything at that time. I mean, people who had near-death experiences and they were dead for a while, they were brain dead and they had very vivid experiences. So the brain was dead. The brain did what the brain did in that moment, but the mind was very active. Mind did what it did, and only you know your own mind. A brain neuroscientist, whatever, they know what your brain can know what your brain does. Okay, great, wonderful. And of course, they're closely related. And we're so used to in the West, and Geshe seemed to be saying that we're so used to in the West to just this materialistic thinking and brain, like my brain thinks, my brain does this. So it's initially a little difficult when you come to Buddhism to separate the two, but it's just a matter of time. Myself, I'm now more familiar with at least the academic idea of the mind versus the brain. So it's just a process that eventually you get used to it. And what Geshe also said was so beautiful, like clear and knowing. Like, what does that even mean? How can you talk about something non-physical and talk of it as clear, like a clear mirror? And he very kindly added the word agent. So it's at least think of it as an agent that has an object and that does something, and it's clear at the same time, and it knows something, or at least it has the potential to know. And again, that doesn't really mean much unless we make an effort to watch our own mind. Do it with your eyes open, do it with your eyes closed. Geshe did the meditation. But to understand, well, first of all, mind always has an object, and you know the object. You're all day long, you're experiencing visual objects, smells, sounds, etc. So all day long, even now you hear my voice. This you're aware of this object, which is my voice, or you see at least a little frame, or I don't know how big it is, but like a frame of my upper part of my body. So you're experiencing right now, and the experience of that which does the experiences, the experience, that which has the experience, that is the mind. And I remember I once listened to a talk by, I think someone called Russell, I forget his whole full name now. Anyway, he was some kind of physicist, and he also talked about the idea that the mind is different from the brain, that you had to differentiate between the two. And he said that the mind, like the brain, is like a movie, what do you call that? In the movie theater, when you have these, we used to have these machines. Projector, that's right, thank you. A projector, a movie projector. So the brain is like a movie projector, and the mind is like the light. Okay, light is still physical, but it's still, there's a difference between the movie projector and the light. So the light is the mind. And then these objects that are shown in front of you on the screen, those are the objects. Those are the objects of the mind. And we're so absorbed in the objects that we don't become aware of the light. Only basically when the movie's over, maybe then we become aware of the light. Or when we don't think of anything, we may actually become aware of the mind. So, of course, it's not my job to talk about this. Geshe did an amazing job, and we need to go back to the Heart Sutra. But taking everything that Geshe has talked about yesterday, and then to take our understanding of the mind and understand that just as the I doesn't exist inherently, excuse me just a sec, just as the mind doesn't exist inherently, and just as the body doesn't exist inherently, the mind doesn't exist inherently either. So we've had about the I, and with the I, initially, it even makes sense. I just label I on the basis of whatever the body does or whatever the mind does. Okay? So I say, I meditate when my mind meditates. I say, I wave, I move my body. I'm not still, labeled on the fact that my hand moves, or the hand moves. And I label my hand based on this I being labeled on this hand. But the I is not just labeled on that hand, it's labeled on more than that, which is why I say it's my hand. Okay, because it's part of something bigger, based on which I also label I. Does that make sense? So I label I on my hand, on my other hand, and on the entirety too, which is why I say it's my hand. And this labeling is just the thought, this is my hand. In that moment, I label with some consistency. It's not that I label randomly and I create things random. No, it's like there's some consistency when I label. And I cannot do it without the basis of labeling, and I cannot do it without the mind that labels. So at least I need the basis of labeling, the basis, which is mind and body, performing a certain function, being together in this way, being connected while I'm alive. This connection between mind and body is severed upon death. But right now, if you ask for the location of the mind and the subtle energy that goes with the mind, it's with the body. So based on this mind, this body, performing a certain function, I label I. But that's not enough to understand that, because even if we understand that, to a certain degree we understand that, we'll end up thinking, well, but my body really exists and my mind really exists. So, okay, the I is merely labeled. It doesn't exist as solidly as it seems. Like in a dream, Geshe said that a few times, like in a dream. But my body, that's really here. That's a solid object. It's here. It's here and not there. This is where it starts. This is where it ends. That's a body. And my mind, boy, what's happening? That's a true mind. That's really there, solidly. It's not just labeled. Especially since I know the mind labels, so how could the mind label itself? Well, that doesn't make sense. So with the body, it's almost easier. It's easier to understand the emptiness of the body since we're more familiar with the body and since the body doesn't label. But the mind is really difficult since we don't know what the mind really is. So it's only really we can academically study it and be very good at positing the definitions, etc. But I mean, yeah, Geshe said it really nicely. What does that mean, clear and knowing anyway? What does that mean? So to experience what is clear, what is knowing, what is that aspect, like a mirror, knowing its object, perceiving something, sometimes doubting, sometimes getting angry, sometimes loving, sometimes wishing, and so forth. What does that mind do? So therefore, understanding the mind as an entity that at least is aware of something and has an object. And then understanding on top of it doesn't exist inherently. It's just labeled. It's just labeled. So labeled again. And what does the labeling? The mind. But Geshe said it so beautifully again, with the hand, I touch myself. It's always different types of mind that do all these things. And since we all call them mind, it sounds like there's just one single mind. Just as when I say I touch myself, it seems like that which touches is also the one that is touched. Yeah, like I'll touch my own finger with my own finger. Well, that which touches is never the part that's touched. You see, that touches, but I say my finger touches itself. But actually, we need to be very clear that I label finger on all of these parts, which is why I say my finger touches itself. But that is which touches, and that is which is being touched. All right. So likewise with the mind, that which labels and that which is labeled, those are different things. Those are different types of mind, I should say. Okay, different types of mind arising at different times. The mind is so intricate, so complicated. We can have in 1 minute so many different minds, right? Can have so many different minds. So no surprise, we totally identify with that. We can't separate it. We can't separate the loving mind from the angry mind. Sometimes it's just so rapidly after another. We may just identify with one. Oh, I'm just angry. Well, I don't know, I feel stupid or whatever. We totally ignore the other types of mind. So really there's no self that controls the whole act. It's just different minds that arise one after the other, and they do arise because of familiarity. The more familiar we are with the mind, the more frequently and the longer it arises. That's why meditation is a form of, it is a familiarization with types of mind that are positive, that help us, that bring us happiness, because that's why we're doing this. That's why the Buddha taught the Dharma. The Dharma is a form of psychology that teaches us the means and methods to happiness, to lasting happiness, and the means and methods to bring lasting happiness to others. Okay. Therefore, with regard to the mind, there's so many different types. And the first job we have is to watch the mind, to look at it, to understand it more in general. And then we start being able to differentiate between the different types. Now, the one that is mentioned here is feeling. Okay, so when we talk of a person, again, Geshe said the same thing. He said, who are we as a person? Basically, the ingredients as a person are mind and body. It's not really anything else. What else is there? If you talk about yourself, if you want to summarize yourself as a person, since the I is labeled on mind and body, mind or body, or mind and body, just depends. I mean, it depends. The labeling is just a thought. So whether you label based on both mind and body, or just one part of your mind, one part of your body, it depends on the situation. Therefore, the body, when we talk about the person, we talk about mind and body. And in the Indian Buddhist tradition, and I guess even before Buddhism came to India, and that's why the Buddha took it on, there was talk of what is the I? Of course, the Atman. Pre-Buddhist philosophers spent a lot of time talking about the I. In fact, philosophically, the establishing an I that the Buddha later on denied. So that I was talked of in the context, I suppose, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure the Buddha actually came up with the 5 aggregates. It probably existed before that. So talking of 5 aggregates, so a way of dividing body and mind into 5 aggregates. So you could have just said 2 aggregates, be much easier. What he basically did was 1 aggregate, the body, and 4 for the mind. So he divided the mind into 4 aspects. Okay. So what did he say? He took feeling and discernment or discrimination. He took them out. Okay. Put them into 1 category. And the big question is why? So he took feeling and discrimination, 1 category. So you have the body, all right, that's 1 category, that's part of a person. Then feeling and discernment or discrimination. Now you have 3 categories. Now it's got 2 left, 2 categories left. 1 category is saying main mind. It's just taking the mind without all its detailed function, but taking the main function of the mind, which is just to be aware of an object, right? That's the main function of the mind, to be aware of an object. And he called that main mind, which is just another way of saying the mind from the point of view of its main function. That's called main mind. The mind from the point of view of its main function. What is that? Be aware of something. That's called main mind. Okay. And then there are all these different other functions besides that main function. So 1 is to feel something. Okay, it's already the category I mentioned, feeling. 1 is to discern, to differentiate. This is this is that. That's called discernment. All right. So the main function of the mind is to be aware. From that point of view, we talk about the category of mind. That's called main mind. So the mind from the point of view of its main category. And then the mind from the point of view of its ability to feel something, and the mind from the point of view of its ability to discern something. Those are 3 categories, okay, of the mind. And then everything else. The rest goes into the 4th category of the mind. Everything else, okay? So again, you have the category of the body. You have the category of the main quality of the mind, which is just to be aware of its object, which is therefore called main mind. Sounds weird, but never mind. It's really saying the mind from the point of view of its main ability to be aware, its main function. Okay? And then you have the mind from the point of view of its function to feel, the mind from the point of view of its function to discern and to differentiate. And all the other functions and all the other minds, therefore, the other types of awareness being in the 4th category. So in this way, you have the form, physical form, the physical body, feeling, discernment, non-compositional factor, which is like, never mind the etymology, it's like anything that is not the other category. And main mind. Okay. This is kind of the order it's presented. Well, I could also say it differently. So the body, the main mind, feeling, discernment, and non-compositional factor, which is anything else that is not part of the 4. Okay. And the only question that arises is why feeling and discernment separate? To mention the main function of the mind, to just be aware of an object, that makes sense. to mention the body separately because it's physical, that makes sense. It would have been much easier to say and everything else, right? To say the body, the main factor of the main function of the mind to know its object, or to be aware of its object, so main mind, and everything that is not mentioned, that is not those two, main mind and body, and so putting them in one category. But no, in the past there were two, the category that we could just put them into one. They took out the mind from the point of view of the function of feeling, and the mind from the point of view of the function of discernment, and then take everything that's the rest. That's it. So it's a bizarre way of categorizing things. We don't do that. Well, maybe we do, but just not with the mind, right? So we're not familiar with it, but once you learn it, it becomes easy. And then, having said that, after we talked about the self, the I doesn't exist inherently, as it's said in the Heart Sutra. So just like the 5 aggregates, could you, oh, I can just look up in my own notes where it says with the Heart Sutra. We're still at this very central part. I apologize for that, but it requires so much explanation, and later on it becomes so much easier to understand it. Let me just look for my own notes. Heart Sutra. Okay. Outlines. Yep, here we go. Any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. So the 5 aggregates also implies, well, just as the I lacks inherent existence, so do the 5 aggregates lack inherent existence. So implied, therefore, okay, forget about the I, merely labeled, doesn't exist inherently. It's merely labeled on the basis of the 5 aggregates. Now let's look at the 5 aggregates. They're also labeled, don't exist inherently. And he says this specifically by way of the 4 profundities. The profundity of the ultimate, so the body lacks inherent existence. And then the profundity of the conventional, so the form is empty. Okay, that's the profundity of the ultimate. Then the profundity of the conventional, for emptiness is form. So in other words, just because the body lacks inherent existence, that's why it can actually exist. Okay, and then saying the profundity of the true truth being of one nature, saying, well, those 2 truths, the body is the conventional truth, the lack of independent, objective existence, that it's its ultimate truth, those 2 cannot be separated. They're of one nature. Okay, that's when the text says emptiness is no other than form, or form is empty, emptiness is form. Wait, what does it say? I always get confused. Yeah, form is no other than emptiness. Great, there it is. Emptiness is no other than form. Okay, great. And then he says the same. So he says it for form, and we think about it, we meditate upon it. So in other words, form is just like in a dream. Your body's just like in a dream. It appears to exist inherently, but it doesn't exist that way. But it can only exist because it lacks this inherent existence, although it appears differently. And the body and its lack of inherent existence, they cannot be separated. The body exists because of the lack of inherent existence, and the lack of inherent existence of the body exists because there's a body. Okay? And it's like looking at a coin just from different angles. Okay? You look at the coin from different angles. You look at the body, there's a conventional body, but there's also the lack of inherent existence of the body. And those 2 are only possible if you have both. So they're of one nature. But they're not identical. Just as 2 sides of the same coins are not identical, although you can't separate them, they're still nominally different. There's a difference between the emptiness of the body and the body itself. So that's what is said with form is empty, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. But we have to do the same now with regard to feeling, because this is the next aggregate that's mentioned. And so the question that I haven't answered yet, why do they separate feeling and discrimination as separate from all the other functions of the mind, except for the main function that is to be aware of its object? And in the Abhidhamma Kosha, the answer that is given for that is that they say ordinary people, they quarrel with one another because of feeling. Scholars, learned people, they quarrel with one another, they debate with one another, or quarrel or argue with one another because of discernment. I don't know whether that really helps. There's something to it, it's like the reason we have trouble with one another is because of feeling, number one. I want to feel good, I don't want to feel bad. And if you're in any way responsible for making me feel bad, you're in trouble. I'll have a problem with you, right? So definitely on a daily basis, there's arguments, there's quarrels because of that. But also, I have this opinion, I see it this way, you see it in a different way. I disagree with you, and so because we disagree. So discernment. Well, feeling, number one. Feeling is a function of the mind. Every mind comes with a feeling. Every mind comes with a certain feeling. Okay, so whenever you see something, there is either a good feeling, a pleasant feeling, or an unpleasant one, or you may call it no feeling at all, but that's actually described as a neutral feeling. Neither pleasant nor unpleasant, so it's a neutral feeling. And that is responsible for so many of our emotional responses on so many levels, right? I mean, this is from your own experience. I don't need to say much about it. You all know that. If you're around a person who makes you feel crappy every time you see them, sooner or later you'll be angry with them. You don't want to see their face. You resent them, okay? If they say things to you that make you feel bad, you resent them. Okay, so feeling, usually the feeling of an unpleasant feeling leads to anger, leads to aggression, to resentment. And if they make you feel really good, physically and mentally, right? Physically, in terms of, they touch you in a certain way and you're aroused in a certain way and whatever, happens to you physically. And on top of that, they make you feel really good, like really understood and really, they really get you and you can really be yourself and makes you feel like deep within feel good. Great ingredient for attachment. Okay, best ingredient for attachment, because wow, you feel understood, the physical sensation, the mental sensation. Of course, we become attached. So attachment sets in. And then if it's neither, well, it's usually the feeling of neither is associated with ignorance, but also a sense of indifference. I just don't care. They don't make me feel good. They don't make me feel bad. I just couldn't care less about them, right? Don't care about them. So our relationship with other people is determined by those three types of feelings. I'm attached to that person. I resent that person. I really don't care about them. To do with feeling. So our relationships, when you're with other people, when you in your group of people, before long you go like, don't care. Like, don't care. All to do with three feelings. Okay, so it's quite big, those feelings. So feelings are big, and you can't ignore your feelings. You can't ignore your feelings. If you start Buddhism and every time you study Buddhism, you feel miserable, you're never going to be able to get into Buddhism. You just won't. Until that feeling goes away, no way. Right? Therefore, it's so important to start initially very gently and just do as much as you enjoy doing and then stop. With meditation, it's the same thing. Never overdo it. All right? We need to, this is the nature of the mind. This is like happiness makes us to want to get more. unhappiness. And that's all right. Once the afflictions are gone, there'll be a natural state of happiness. There'll just be a natural state of happiness. And that's supposed to be the feeling our mind experiences. That's just in the nature of the mind, to have that happy experience, to be content. What does it mean, happiness? Not like this blissed out, like, oh great, I just hit this person I don't like. No. It's the sense of it's all right, being satisfied, being relaxed, and just content. That's the kind of happiness we're talking about. That's pleasant. Okay. That's that kind of pleasure we're looking for. Anyway, the point here I'm making is that we talk about feeling as a function of the mind, to feel, either have a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant, or a neutral feeling. We talk about it separately. Well, as it says in the Abhidhamma, in Vasubandhu's Abhidhamma Kosha, one reason is that we have our troubles in this world, like ordinary people's trouble in the world, like ordinary trouble is always based on those three types of feelings. And they're really, really important. Feeling is important to recognize it. And one thing, maybe to go into emptiness, it's really interesting that talking about inherent existence, how do we not just get a sense that there's an inherent table, there's an inherent person, an inherent car, an inherent I? Okay, it's not, we don't stop there. We also have a sense this is an inherent pleasurable object. How do we get there? This is an inherent pleasurable person. So not only do we label person on the basis of his or her mind and body, or mind or body, but also pleasure, we label that also in dependence on how we feel. It's so interesting. Actually, my feeling of pleasure that I associate with that person is felt here. My mind experiences pleasure. And then I have the thought, this person is pleasurable over there. It's not, the pleasure is felt here, but my mind labels pleasurable. And before long, I don't really understand that process. It's so quick. And I'm so busy with other things that I don't notice that although the pleasure is experienced with my own mind, and although because I experience pleasure here, I now label this person as pleasant, but before long, I see the pleasant as within that person. I see this person, I'm thinking, that's a pleasant person, right? And I believe the pleasantness sits within this person. And the only reason I experience pleasure is because the pleasure is in them. There's no pleasure in them. They're not pleasant or unpleasant or anything from their own side. Is my own mind thinking pleasurable? Because if they had that pleasantness sitting within them, well, everyone should see it. It's not like I'm the only one who recognizes the pleasantness. They should see this person in the same way. But it doesn't happen, does it? Some people look at them and they go, ooh, it makes me feel creepy. They're creepy, ooh, or whatever, right? Because their feeling when they're with this person is a different one. And so they label not only person, we don't just label person on another person. There's much more of a story. This person is like this, and A, B, X, Y, and Z, and over and over and over. So pleasant and unpleasant are definitely one of the two labels we give right away. And therefore, friend, I like them, I don't like them, I don't care. Our reaction. So pleasant, unpleasant, or I don't care. I mean, you have to become aware of that first. It's really, our mind does this very quickly. In a few seconds, you've decided whether you like them or not. And then usually it changes. I mean, sometimes the person you initially didn't like at all becomes your best friend, right? We all know that. But the point is, our mind labels pleasant based on mind and body of this person over there. Mind, we can only guess it's there, but the body we perceive, and the expression of their face, their movements, everything that is a result of their body and their mind. And depending on how that makes us feel, I label pleasant. Okay, fine. But then I believe the pleasantness sits within the other person. It's in that person. I forget it was me. I'm not aware. It was me just labeling it based on this feeling, which is over here. Okay. So does that make sense to some degree? Right? Or drink or something I eat. And all it needs, let's say hummus is your favorite fruit. Right, that's one of my favorite ones. I don't get it much these days, but never mind. So hummus is one of your favorite fruits. All it needs, hummus that was made with some ingredient that was off and makes you violently sick. Okay, so first you see hummus and it's like, oh, the world is still okay, right? Oh, there's hummus. Okay, depending on how long you haven't eaten it, whoa, oh, it's okay. It's not like as profound as meeting a person, but of course there's some pleasure there. But you eat it and it makes you violently sick. Next time you see hummus, it's like, ugh, hummus. It's kind of this, it's not the same. I mean, it's this different portion of hummus, but it's the same recipe, right? And still, we now associate it with something unpleasant, as if something is intrinsic in it. This is like saying, welcome to the sense of an intrinsic disgustingness of hummus, right? And that, when you recognize that, you have that for everything, for other people, for situations, for everything. That's one of the first steps, to recognize it's just my mind labeling on the basis of how I felt. That's it. So feeling is really important, really important. Okay. And love makes sense because I don't care how I feel. That's just a feeling. That's a personal feeling. I love them not because how they make me feel. I love them because they have a mind, they have the wish to be happy, and they deserve to be happy. And love is the wish for someone to be happy. Attachment is different. Give me that happiness. It's kind of like the kind of mind that wishes to get that happiness from that other person. It's like, give me that happiness that I see in you. You've given me in the past. You have to give that to me again. Right? That's why relationships, we have a lot of trouble, because initially we were so happy. There was all that happiness, and now it's gone. So they're doing something wrong. They're no longer making me feel good. So we start nagging, right? Well, in the past you gave me flowers. In the past you make me food, and in the past, right? It was just making us feel good, and we labeled the pleasantness over there. And now we need that pleasantness to continue on, and you better not change. That is, better give me that happiness and continue. And that's attachment. Does that make sense? So feeling, really important. But feeling itself, it's a type of mind that consists of moments of mind, right? What is feeling? Feeling is a type of it's a continuum. You can't just, a split second, you cannot have feeling. If there's just a split second of mind that experiences something, like just a split second of hummus, the experience of hummus, if the next moment you're distracted, it cannot become a pleasant feeling. You need some continuation. Does that make sense? And each of those moments, none of those moments are the feeling of feeling good with hummus, but it's that continuum on the basis of which I label pleasant. None of the moments it is made of, and not its object is also not its object hummus. It perceives hummus, it thinks of hummus, for instance, or it experiences it. But the hummus is not the hummus. It's dependent on the hummus is not the pleasure, but the pleasure is dependent on it. It couldn't exist without it. And the appearing hummus, it's not the same as the hummus itself. The appearing hummus, there's the appearing hummus, and there's the hummus over there, right? So the appearing hummus, the hummus that appears to my own mind, that is also part of that feeling. That is also part of the feeling, and labeled on the appearance of these moments, these different moments that in their continuum lead to something that I like. Based on that, I label it feeling. But it doesn't exist inherently, right? On top of that, how do I know it doesn't exist inherently? Because I can label a pleasant feeling, for instance, on something one day, say it's pleasant, on it a different day, I say it's not pleasant. Does that make sense? So for instance, if everything goes well in my life and I have so much pleasure, right? Just being able to go outside and just be with friends, it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. It's just normal to have that every day. It's kind of neutral. But then you have a lockdown for I don't know how many months, and for the first time, you can be with your friends, right? And you have like a feeling, like the emotion you have now, you label it as pleasant. Okay. Versus if you have it every day, okay, if you have it every day, you may not necessarily perceive it as pleasant. Or another example, like sometimes my teachers used to give, if you don't eat any salt, then you may experience the salt very strongly when you eat it. Okay, when you add a little bit, you experience it very strongly. Versus if you usually eat a lot of salt, then if you add a little bit, only this little bit, the same amount as I mentioned before, when you never eat it, you don't notice it. Does that make sense? So if you have the same emotion on a daily basis, you always have it, you wouldn't really say it's pleasant. But when you were really down for a long time and now you have that feeling, it's much more prominent. Okay, so it's dependent on many different factors. And so we label it only on the basis of all these factors, and there's nothing intrinsically called feeling. Therefore, feeling is empty of inherent existence, but it exists, and it only can exist because it is merely labeled on the basis of many different parts other than itself. Okay? So it is labeled in that when we talk about it, when we think about it, it's the mind that labels it. All right? But it doesn't mean we don't experience it. We still experience it. We have an experience of it, but it doesn't exist in and of itself. Okay, so that's feeling. So feeling doesn't exist in and of itself, but it does exist. It conventionally does, and it only does exist because it lacks inherent existence. And feeling, the fact that it lacks inherent existence makes it possible. That it lacks inherent existence makes it possible for it to exist, and that lack of inherent existence cannot be separated from feeling. Right? It's just the feeling itself is one part of the coin. It's the conventional existence of feeling, but at the same time, it lacks inherent existence, and those two are just two different sides of the same coin. So they're of one nature. Okay. But they're still nominally different. So although they're of the same nature, but they're not identical. Okay, one is the lack of inherent existence, a negative phenomenon, non-affirming negative. One is a feeling, something, an affirming phenomenon. Okay, so that's with regard to feeling. Then there's discernment. Discernment is a type of mind that can distinguish between this and that. Again, a lot of our problems in this world, and of course they're not really, they also interact with feeling, right? Like I'm right, they're wrong, etc. But leaving aside feeling, as we've just described it, there's discernment. This is good, this is bad. I'm right, they're wrong. This is what's good, this is what's bad, etc. All based on feeling, but nonetheless leading to this level of making sense of the world, of myself in it, and me, others, etc. Again, very important quality of the mind. In fact, feeling is a very important quality which will eventually take me to enlightenment, simply because once you get the taste of love and compassion, you don't want all the other tastes, right? In the end, as Hollis talked about it, makes us feel good. It benefits us the most. Love and compassion benefit us more than others. It seems like it just benefits others. So I want to be altruistic. But really, when those beings who really experience love and compassion, they're so happy and they're so relaxed. They feel so much better that they're driven to do more, right? That's when they really, and they continue doing it. And everyone else may hate them and may feel miserable around them. They'll just continue doing it because it makes them feel good, and they just have that, well, makes them feel good, but they just have that love anyway. But initially, and they no longer, don't misunderstand, it's not like they do it because it makes them feel good, but they just, that's how they feel from now on. And so they just keep pouring out this love and continue to love other sentient beings, but it mainly benefits themselves. So it's really, Buddhism is very much based on feeling. Like, if you don't want to feel miserable, don't create the karma. That's what you start with, right? Don't do upon others if you don't want it to happen. That's karma. That's using feeling, with karma. And then later on, you continue, and it's like love and compassion makes you feel good. And so we keep doing this until we no longer care. We just live this love and compassion. We're so familiar with it, but at the same time feel really good. Okay. Then there's discernment. Again, as feeling, it can be very harmful if we don't use it in the right way. It can lead to harmful actions, to harmful, of course, me, others, this whole distinguishing, etc., discriminating. But of course, if we use discernment in the right way, understand emptiness and so forth, oh, incredible. Without discernment, we can't understand emptiness. But what is discernment? It's a type of mind, all right? Mind that depends on many, many different moments that are not itself. Yeah, depends on an object. So discernment, is it this, is it that? So moments in time where none of those moments is discernment, but as a whole, as like a continuum in time, labeled on that, based on that, we label discernment. In and of itself, it's not discernment. If you could see this continuum of doing something or performing a function, it's not discernment, but we call it that. We label it discernment. We have the thought discernment. So it lacks inherent existence. It doesn't exist in and of itself as discernment, but nonetheless, because it is labeled, it can exist. So therefore, discernment is empty. Emptiness is discernment. Discernment is no other than emptiness. Okay, so it doesn't exist in and of itself. That's its aspect. But at the same time, it's conventionally discernment. So those two cannot be separated. But there's still, discernment is empty, is emptiness. Emptiness is discernment. Still, they're not identical. Okay. All right. Then you can do the same with all the other mental factors, Plus, what's also included in this category, non-compositional factor, what is also included in that category is also imprints in the mind. Like, they're not mind themselves, abilities themselves, they're just kind of like a residue in the mind, what's called imprints. It's like, even though right now I'm not angry, I have the imprint of anger, which is why when the external circumstances or internal circumstances come together, that imprint can give rise to anger again. Okay, so it's kind of like in Tibetan they have the word nupa, which is a very general term, can have many different meanings. So it's kind of like a residue, or it can even be called an energy, but energy is not a good word, like a residue, something left in the mind that can give rise to certain minds. So these imprints, as they're called, imprint because, like, just as you leave a footstep in the dust, right? So the mind, every time it arises, it leaves something behind in the mind that follows, right? It leaves something behind, just as a footstep in the dust leaves something behind. So in that sense, every thought you think, your mind is different a moment later. It's influenced by that thought, and that is called the imprint. Okay. Now, therefore, this mind that has no form, that has no shape, that is just this experiencing entity, to make it clear, we talk about the pleasure, the feeling, the discernment, then all the residues or imprints in the mind, and all the functions of the mind that are not discernment, that are not feeling, and they're not the main function of the mind, they're described as a non-compositional factor. Okay, so that lacks inherent existence, of course. Okay, and it's only there because, so it lacks inherent existence, but it exists, it's possible because of its emptiness. It cannot be separated from its emptiness, but it's also not identical to it. Okay? So non-compositional factor is empty. Emptiness is non-compositional factor. Non-compositional factor is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than a non-compositional factor. And lastly, you have main mind. The mind from the point of view of the function of just being aware of its object. That also doesn't exist inherently. To be aware of an object, you need a few moments. Again, in time, you have a continuum. You need an object, right? You need a former moment of mind to make it possible. You need all these causes and conditions, and you have these sub moments labeled on the basis of which you label being aware of its object, right? So it's not in and of itself a main mind. No, it's just called that based on moments that are not a main mind. Does that make sense? It's extremely difficult, but this is what this is saying. And Geshe said it so nicely today. Oh, don't expect just a few lessons or whatever, however long, a few years of your life, a few centuries of your life. No, centuries, etc. A few decades of your life to understand it right away. It's a long process. It's a long process. But what else is there to do but to go over it again and again? And every time our understanding deepens just a little bit. And so therefore, this is the explanation of the 4 profundities. And I thought it was nice to talk about the mind in connection with what Geshe said yesterday. Hopefully, I've been able to bring those a little bit together. Understanding that the mind is an agent. It always does something. What it does, at the very least, it is aware. And it's always aware of some object. It always has an object. So it's an agent that has an object that it does something with. And the very least, that is the main function, is that it's aware. Okay, it's knowing. It knows. Knowing doesn't necessarily mean understand correctly, but being aware. You could use the word knowing. There's 2 ways of interpreting it. Some say knowing means to really understand, and then you just say it has the ability to know. Or in a wider sense, the interpretation would be it is aware of something. It's just aware. It experiences something. Okay, so there's some experiencing aspect. All right. And that object that is experienced, it also appears to the mind. It appears, right? I mean, you have an appearance of it to the mind. Otherwise, you couldn't say if it's the table and so forth, you can't say it's blue. Blue appears to your mind. And if you dream about blue, blue appears to the mind. Okay, something appears to the mind. Therefore, the mind is clear, as in it's like a mirror. Things can appear to it. Even if you close your eyes, you can take anything to mind and it appears as if it was in front of you. So something appears. But even when it's in front of you, the thing doesn't enter your eye. No, it doesn't have to, because it appears to your mind. It doesn't have to. Yeah, it appears to your mind. And depends on the distance, smaller or bigger, right? Because it's not the thing itself that enters your mind, because otherwise the moon wouldn't look so tiny. If it was really entering, you'd have a big thing in your head, in your mind, right? Okay. So therefore, the mind can know things. It can, well, it is aware of things that appear to it. That is main function. But it can do so much more. It can do so much more, even though we don't have mind of an awakened being, of a Buddha that can do even more. But we can do the basic functions. We can feel pleasure, displeasure, and neutral feelings, or none of the 2. Although there can be ingredients for a lot of problems, of course, anger, attachment, etc. But we can also utilize them for our Dharma practice. And then there's discernment. We can differentiate, especially as human beings. His Holiness the Dalai Lama always talks about it. As humans, we've got so much intelligence. If we use it wisely, we can do so much great in the world. In fact, we can use this human life to actualize our fullest potential as a Buddha, become a fully enlightened Buddha. Okay, just remove what's extra in our mind. Geshe said it in the very beginning. Cognitive obscurations, the obscurations, what's extra in our mind, just remove them. And the way to remove them is to understand what's talked about in the Heart Sutra. The mind that understands what is talked about in the Heart Sutra, that is emptiness. That is the mind that can remove what's extra in our mind. It's like a the best vacuum cleaner, right? It vacuum cleans everything that's extra in our mind. It basically removes it. Great. So, but why? And of course, we talked about it last time, as explained here, for the sake of other sentient beings. This is the Mahayana motivation. So, implied in that question, how should someone, a son or daughter of the lineage, Geshe explained the son or daughter or child of the lineage from the point of view of bodhicitta. According to the commentaries that I've based my explanation on, they say it's based on great compassion. Just a different way of interpreting it. But the point is, if we reach the point where it's not just me, center of the universe, and only my suffering, my happiness matter, and I'm not just saying superficially, but deep within, when we reach this point, when it's others suffering, that's my main concern. That's my goal in life. Then I've become a boy or girl that is a child of the lineage, son or daughter that is child of the lineage. Okay. And then what do I need to generate? I need to generate wisdom. Because if I really want to bring happiness to other sentient beings, what I can do is make the most out of my own mind, utilize my mind in a way that I experience the one thing I really wish to experience: lasting, deep contentment and happiness, peace of mind. And once I can reach that state, and I know, likewise, at the same time, I have the knowledge of how others can reach that same state, right? Then once I have that state, once I've become a Buddha, I can be of greatest benefit. And that's why I want to become a Buddha, only for that. I say sometimes jokingly, like, if my wish for all sentient beings to be happy, if I can bring that happiness to all sentient beings by becoming a hairdresser, well, then I would want to become a hairdresser. But since my ability to benefit others is more limited as a hairdresser as opposed to a Buddha, I wish to become a Buddha. That's why. And so then here implied in the explanation in the Heart Sutra with regard to emptiness, so we're just at the very beginning explaining emptiness based on reasoning, and we've gone through the reasoning before. Based on reasoning, we've understood to some degree that the self doesn't exist inherently, but that the same reasoning can be applied to the body. Okay, we look for the body among that which we call the parts of the body. Where else are we going to look? And we find no solid body other than the one we've just a conventional body we have labeled. And the same is true for feeling, right? Geshe said it beautifully. The whole world, Disneyland is made for feeling good, right? Hotels, restaurants, so much in this world is made, has come into existence in order to bring forth the feeling of happiness. Whether people feel that way, that's a different matter. But the intention, well, was at least to feel happy, to make a lot of money having Disneyland, right? You're the founder of Disneyland. You don't care, but you want others are happy, so they go there, they spend a lot of money, and you get the money. So in the end, whether directly or indirectly, you wish others to be happy if you build well, you wish the people to go to Disneyland to be happy. So again, it goes back to feeling. All right. So that's basically the part that we talk about as an explanation of how to train in the perfection of wisdom on the path of accumulation and preparation. Accumulation as in like accumulating your understanding of emptiness, but also being in the initial stages, but also accumulating more positive potential, as in being more loving, more kind, of course, based on bodhicitta. So you generate a bodhicitta, the wish to become enlightened, and now accumulate everything that is necessary to go on from here, to develop this mind that has understood emptiness to such a degree that it's more focused and more powerful to remove in your mind what's extra. Okay, so it's like well, first you need to generate more concentration. That happens also on the level of the path of accumulation, on the first level. And it's all implied. It's implied in the sense that the words are not here in here, but by implication, the question was, someone who has great compassion, who's now moving towards the Mahayana, moving in the Mahayana direction, because great compassion, I need to stress this again, is not merely the wish for others, for all sentient beings to be happy, that myself to bring this about. This is great compassion according to the Mahayana. Not only do I wish for all sentient beings to be happy, but I want to do something about it, right? To be at least be able to bring happiness. Whether the happiness comes, whether I'm the one that brings them a happiness, that's a different matter, because you always need two. You need others and you need the ability to do so. But the ability to do so, you have that wish. And in that way, you move towards the Mahayana. And once you talk about emptiness, then from there, it's implied, well, you understand it first conceptually. Okay, so in the same way as I can understand what I did yesterday, like memory, it's a conceptual understanding, but it's distracted because of our very disruptive thoughts. We need to develop a certain degree of concentration. And once we have a certain degree of concentration, right, that is such that you can focus on one object for 4 hours at least, you can take your understanding of emptiness. Let's say you've understood emptiness now. You take feeling, or you take discernment, discrimination, these 4 profundities of the ultimate, the conventional, of being one nature and being nominally distinct. This understanding, it's there. Now you want it not to be, not only to be there and then think of tomorrow and yesterday and again go back and think about tomorrow and it will be disrupted and come back for a few seconds. No, you want to be able to stay focused on it for a longer period of time, to remove in the mind all the other types of mind that are the opposite of your understanding. Attachment, anger, they stand in direct contradiction to your understanding of emptiness, because all these negative emotions are based on the belief that whatever you're angry with, whatever you're attached to, exists inherently. And they are powerful. They are so powerful, these states of mind. If you watch your own mind, they're almost all the time there. Almost all the time there. Even when you become a Dharma practitioner, and then you become attached to your teacher, to your Dharma, to your mala, to your altar, to your Sangha, right? Same attachment, just a different object. Now you want to break through these, and you can only do it with the mind that understands emptiness and that remains in your continuum for longer periods, that is not disrupted. So therefore you need shamatha. You need to bring shamatha and your, even though conceptual understanding of emptiness, you need to bring the two together, right? And that, once you can do that, you are on the path of preparation, second level. So pretty simple. I mean, simple, not simply done, but not that hard to understand, okay? You enter the Mahayana path once you have generated the wish to become a Buddha, only because you have great compassion. So because you yourself want to bring happiness to all sentient beings, understanding only Buddhahood can really be most effective in that way. So you wish to become a Buddha. That's your wish. That's your entry into the Mahayana path. You wish to be a Buddha. But to become a Buddha, you need to remove what's extra in your mind. We have everything to be a Buddha. We have this pure Buddha mind already, but it's totally loaded with misapprehensions of reality and their resulting negative emotions. So these misapprehensions, perceiving phenomena to exist inherently and solidly and independently, those misapprehensions, they need to be removed. We need to get rid of them. And we can only get rid of them if we understand that phenomena don't exist that way. So another way of calling that is called the mind realizing emptiness. And because our misapprehension of reality is ever present, it's always there. Even when you realize emptiness, your misapprehension is so strong that you realize emptiness for a second, and for the next 23 hours and I don't know how many minutes and seconds, the misapprehension of reality is present. So in order to counteract that, you, during the path of accumulation, which is the first level, once you generate bodhicitta, you develop concentration. And you develop concentration to such a degree that you can be focused for at least 4 hours on one object. And yeah, you may focus on a crocodile or an apple for 4 hours, and maybe there's no anger and no attachment during that time. Yes, not just maybe, it's not there, but you want more than that. You want to bring your concentration together with your understanding of emptiness. And now you can stay with the mind that realizes emptiness conceptually, right? That works like a memory. It's not like a direct experience, it's still conceptual. But for 4 hours, that is only 21 hours of a lot of balagan because of our misapprehension, right? Amazing. Okay. And it starts already making a huge change in your mind, in your life. Your life is different. It's not the same. Okay, great. So this far, we've basically come to the text as part of the text. So an extensive explanation of how to train in the perfection of wisdom on the path of accumulation and preparation, which is really just implied, but it's saying you really need to become familiar with the 4 profundities in terms of not just the I, but also mind and body. And as Geshe said, mind is even more important. Mind is everything. Mind is everything. Our whole life is determined by our mind, by our own mind. Okay? So, therefore, understanding the 5 aggregates, that's our job. That's our job based on these 4 profundities. Okay. And once we've done that, we can move on to the path of, where are we? Seeing. Okay. And that's on the next page then. So it's basically form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, formless is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Okay, those words are still part of the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. And implied in that is, yes, first you understand emptiness correctly and generate concentration. And now slowly bring the 2 together. And once you bring concentration and the understanding of emptiness together, once you can keep focused for at least 4 hours on emptiness, then you reach the path of preparation. Okay, with the same emptiness. And the path of seeing we do next time. Great. Oh, now I've gone a little bit over time, a little less time to do the meditation, but you're welcome to just lock yourself out whenever you need to. We'll just do the meditation. What we did today, I'll lead you through it. Let's take feeling and discernment, at least those 2, and the remaining ones we still have time to do. So we'll do the rest then next time. Does that sound like something you could still do? At least some of you? Can you nod? Okay, great. All right, thanks. So let's do some meditation. And please, as I said, just feel free to lock yourself out, but otherwise just bear with me. Before we do the dedication, we'll do some meditation on what we've learned today. And we'll start with breathing, focusing on the breath. So now, with regard to feeling, just take a moment to generate a mind that experiences a pleasant feeling. Maybe just conjure up a memory of pleasure. Bring to mind a time when meeting someone made you feel really good. Or being praised made you feel good. Now, can you find that pleasure? Being made of parts, that is, it's made of the appearance of an object, and of many moments in time perceiving that object. So pleasure is a mental continuum to which an object appears. So is the pleasure different from the moments in time? Different from its object? Or is it the same as all of those? Of course, it doesn't make sense to say it's different from them. Because without these moments of experiencing the object, you couldn't have pleasure. So then the other option would be it's one with the appearing object and the different moments in time. But if it were all of those moments, the pleasure would have to be the appearing object. And it would have to be at the same time, all these moments which do not appear at the same, which do not arise at the same time. So therefore, pleasure is just a continuum of moments having a particular object, with none of those moments being pleasure. But labeled on those moments, we label pleasure. Pleasant feeling. Just as the moments of walking, none of those moments of moving your legs are the actual walking. But walking is the activity that is labeled on each different position of the legs. The same is true for discernment. The mind that differentiates between this or that. Which consists of the appearing object, that which is to be discerned, and different moments in time. Considering the object, the different aspects of it. Discernment is neither, does neither exist separately from its parts, its appearing object and its moments. Nor is it all of those parts. So in other words, whichever mind there is, feeling, discernment, or any other type of awareness, it doesn't exist in and of itself, independently. And intrinsically. For it cannot be found among its endless moments of experiencing. It's just labeled based on its object and its many moments of activity, perceiving the object. In other words, labeled on the object and the activity. Based on the object and the activity, we label the agent, that is the mind. So not only is your I merely labeled on a physical body and numerous different types of mind, but also your basis of imputation for the self is merely labeled on something other than itself. Your body is labeled on the basis of a head, limbs, a trunk, skin, bones, flesh, blood, so forth. And your mind is labeled on an appearing object and on different moments of perception. perception of those objects. And so therefore, since your mind does not exist inherently, it can be transformed. It can be changed. In dependence on the right causes and conditions. Since although the mind doesn't exist inherently, conventionally, it has the same basic ingredients than that of a Buddha. So now in conclusion, whatever feeling has arisen in your mind as a result of this meditation, take a few moments to just single-pointedly focus on that feeling, to allow for it to sink deeper. And to affect you more profoundly. Okay. Oh wow, that was a little long. That was 20 minutes. I see some people are gone. All right. So I apologize, that was a little longer than intended. Well, next time I'll make it a little shorter. I'd also like to take some questions. If you have some questions, I'll talk a little shorter, make some time for question and answer, and still have a little time for meditation. So let's conclude this session, Iki, with the dedication prayer. To not forget that, of course, we're not just doing this for our own benefit, but also for the benefit of all sentient beings who are just like us, despite many superficial differences. In the end, all sentient beings have the same basic mind, the same potential as a Buddha. And so to think that since now I found a method to transform my mind, change my mind, may today's session here, or thinking, contemplating, and meditating on the Heart Sutra, become one of the causes for me to remove all that's extra in my mind that is the result of a misapprehension of reality. May I be able to purify myself from all these obscurations and instead actualize the fully enlightened mind of the Buddha, to be of greatest benefit to myself but also to all sentient beings. So really feeling this from the depth of your heart. Let's recite the dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the hopeless find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all the medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and the people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, well, thank you very much. And please keep doing your meditations to do the Heart Sutra every day. And as His Holiness, if you were present yesterday during the during the initiation, His Holiness very much stressed the Sarva Yoga Bodhicitta, which is basically, you don't need to do this practice, but what you should do is bring together great compassion and emptiness. So that's what it means really. It's done in the context of Tantra with the visualization, but even without that, if you can do the visualization, fine. But even without the visualization with the moon disk, which is bodhicitta, and the vajra, which is etc. So if you just do it, just generate compassion for all sentient beings. Generate great compassion. May they all be happy. May it help all sentient beings. May I become a Buddha. Generate bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha. And then reflect upon the fact that, well, sentient beings don't exist inherently. Enlightenment doesn't exist inherently. And bring those two together. So that would be getting the sense of both together. That is like the combination or the union of those two. Bodhicitta as well as the understanding of emptiness. So to understand that your object, your own enlightenment, doesn't exist inherently. Your mind doesn't, the enlightened mind doesn't, sentient beings don't. So if you could do that, if you do on a daily basis, while you do the Heart Sutra, when it says son and daughter of the lineage, that's your clue, that's your cue for compassion and emptiness, bodhicitta, and then form is empty, emptiness is form. That's when you generate the understanding of emptiness. Think of emptiness. All right, great. And then try to remember it throughout the day if you can. And now I really let you go. I'm sorry, it's a long time. And next time I'll stick to the schedule. So an hour and a half, it won't be long. All right, have a great week. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geshe.
You're welcome. Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure, bye-bye.
Thank you.
It was a beautiful lesson. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Good.